Good evening, everyone. So, during the last class, we start we started about management accounting, the introduction of management accounting, the basics of management accounting. We started yesterday. Today, we are going to learn about activity-based costing. Today we will study about activity based costing. So in this chapter, what are the things we are going to learn? First, we are going to learn traditional cost system. Traditional cost system. Then we will learn definitions, meaning of ABC. Then we will learn steps in ABC. Then we will learn about cost pool. And cost drivers. Merits and demerits of ABC. Then activity based information. Activity based information and decision making. So this is our chapter number 2, activity based costing. It consists of the following 6 topics: the traditional cost system, what we used to do before ABC. Then we will learn about some definitions and meanings of ABC. Then steps involved in ABC. We will try to complete this part today. Then this part and some practicals in the second class. And we will wind up by doing this. This consists of some practical questions. So we will wind up by doing this. So it will take around 2 to 2.5 classes, or say 3 classes. In 3 classes we will try to wind up this chapter. It contains 10 marks, I think, no? 10% weightage, so it will give us 10 marks. So 5 plus 10, 15 marks we are completing by doing this chapter. First, we will learn about traditional cost system. Whenever I am reading from the books, you try to underline those parts. It may be useful for your MCQs and short notes. These parts are very important for your short notes and MCQs. The MCQs may come from these parts generally. Under traditional cost system, overhead costs are first allocated and apportioned to various production and service departments, and after that the overhead cost of service departments are reapportioned to various production departments, and once the same are done, then finally overhead cost of production departments are absorbed in the cost objects the product customer on the basis of labor hours, machine hours, prime cost, direct material cost, direct wages cost, etc. What they are trying to say in this: service and production overhead. Service and production overhead. overhead. These are assigned to production departments. And then these costs are further assigned to products. So service and production overhead. Service and production overhead. Say finance and accounts department in a company. It's a service and it's an overhead. The audit department, finance, audit, say administration. So these are generally what? Overheads. The salary of an accountant is overhead, the salary of an auditor is overhead, the salary of admin persons, the cars, the vehicles that the company is using, they are all overheads. These overheads are primarily allocated to the production departments. Firstly, there will be some cost centers. You know cost centers? No. Cost centers, they will have a cost center means something, say in alphanumeric, some digits will be created for the finance department. All the cost incurred by the finance department will be booked under one head, and it will be written as finance cost. Then audit department cost will be booked under some heads, and then this, say finance department has incurred 100 rupees during the year, say all cost. So it includes salary of finance persons, it includes the cars they are using, it includes some refreshment they are using. So it is 100 rupees. Then it will be allocated to different production departments. There may be several production departments will be there. For say for example, I gave the example of HUL. It may have production department for soaps, then shampoos. So in each department there will be a basis based on which this 100 rupees will be allocated to these departments. And then this cost, for say for soaps, then it will be allocated to different products. Lux, I don't know how many type of soaps they make. So then it will be allocated to different products. You got? First the overheads will be booked under some heads, then this overhead is allocated to the production departments. From there the overheads are booked to the products. So what do we get by allocating this overhead? Any idea? কি কৰিব? এই cost বিলাক allocate কৰি কি কৰিব? Huh? What do we get? We have to ascertain the cost of production of Lux, na? Then only we will add some margin, then we will get the what? The selling price we will determine. Cost, margin or profit equal to what? Selling price, right? We will determine the cost. So to determine, if we ignore this cost while determining the cost of a Lux, if we ignore this cost, what will happen? The company will go on a loss, right? So we have to include all the cost. Say for preparing the soap, all the ingredients that are required, the direct material, the direct labor will simply be accounted. But the overhead cost, the cost of the finance person, the audit person, the admin person, and there are many other departments, the security persons, this will not be included, right? So we have to allocate them. So they are allocated to these departments first, and then they are included in the products. First they will be allocated to departments, and then they will be included in the product. So we get the total cost, and then we add up some margin, we get the selling price. So this is the diagram says this only. Traditional, this was the traditional method. This is possible only when we have few products. Then the first para, factory X which produces 10,000 units of product 1, the gamma, and factory Y which produces 1,000 units of each of 10 slightly different versions of gamma. Support activity cost in the factory Y are likely to be a lot higher than in factory X, but the factories produce an identical number of units. For example, factory X will need one setup once, whereas factory Y will have to set up the production run at least 10 times for the 10 different products. Say factory Y therefore incurs more setup cost. There are two factories, factory X and factory Y. Factory X manufactures only one product. Factory Y manufactures 10 products. Factory X manufactures one product. So one product means, say, the design of a Lux soap and the design of a Vivel soap, they are not same, right? They have a different designs, so they need different the what we call the mold. They need different molds to manufacture Lux and Vivel. So if it is manufacturing only one product, so it does not have to set up the mold again and again. Only one time setup, then it can run for the entire month. But if it manufactures 10 products, so how many times it has to set up the mold? 10 times. It has to set up the mold 10 times. But X manufactures how many products? Say 10,000 units. And this one also 10,000 units, 1,000 into 10. 1,000 of each product it manufactures 10. So now in traditional costing, what they will do, they have, say, the overhead cost is 2 lakh. Overhead is 2 lakh. For factory X and Y combined, the overhead cost is 2 lakhs. So 2 lakhs and total units manufactured is how much? 20,000. So 20,000, it will be 10 rupees per unit, right? 10 rupees per unit. You got what I am trying to say? So in traditional method, the product X, for product X, 10 rupees per unit will be allocated, and for product Y also 10 rupees per unit overhead cost will be allocated. Overhead cost allocation. You got what I am trying to say? For product X, 10 rupees per unit will be allocated. 20,000 is the total overhead, 2 lakhs is the total overhead cost. 20,000 is the total number of units. So if we divide, it gets to 10 rupees per unit. ठीक है? 10 rupees per unit. But product X was set up only once. Overhead cost, we don't say, we say it as setup cost. You name it as setup cost. Setup cost. So product X was set up only once, but product Y was set up 10 times. So, but what we are giving, we are allocating 10 rupees per unit for product X and 10 rupees per unit for product Y. This is our traditional approach. But don't you think that the cost to be allocated to product Y should have been more? Because it was set up 10 times. So each time you set up the system, some cost is involved. So the cost to be allocated to product Y should be more, 10 times more, I think, than the cost to set up product X. So this is the disadvantage of the traditional system. So in the same page, The traditional costing system, which assumes that all products consume all resources in proportion. What we are doing? In proportion, we are calculating a proportion, and in that proportion we are allocating the cost to both product X and Y. In proportion to their volumes, tend to allocate too great a proportion of overhead to high volume products, which causes relatively little diversity and hence use fewer support services, and too small a proportion of overhead to low volume product, which cause greater diversity and therefore use more support services. Activity based costing attempts to overcome this problem. Now, in activity based costing, what will be the base? The base will be 11. It requires a setup cost, setup 1 times, it requires setup 10 times. So the base will be 1:11 into 2 lakhs. This will be allocated to product X, and 10 divided by 11 into 2 lakhs. This one will be allocated to product Y. So find out for product X. 1 divided by 11 into 2 lakhs. 181.81, and for this one minus, you divide 2 lakhs divide by 181, 18,000. If we divide, how much it will be? 1,92,000. 10 by 11 থাকিব ন 1 plus 10 equal to 11. এইটো 10 বার সেটআপ কৰিলা, এইটো এবাৰ সেটআপ কৰিলা, তো 11 proportion 18181, 18,181, right? Minus 2 lakhs, minus 2 lakhs, 10 by 11 into 2 lakhs কিমান হ'ব? 1,81,000. ভুল নাই হোৱা জানো? 1,81,818. ঠিক আছে, so it comes to 1,81,818 and it came to 18,181. So for X, for the 10,000 units, the total cost comes to 18,181, and for Y the cost comes to 1,81,818. So for 1 unit of X, what is the cost? 18,181 divided by 10,000, it comes to 1.81, and for Y it will be 18 rupees, right? For Y there should be more cost, so for Y it is 18 rupees, but for X it is 1.81. So now it appears to be more correct, so we can determine the cost of product X and product Y more accurately if we use activity based costing, right? So there are several different methods which can be used to absorb overheads. So now we will go to illustration 1. Illustration 1 says total cost center overhead is 62,000, production output is 13,800 units, direct labor hour is 27,000 hours, machine hours is 34,500, direct wages cost is 17,250, direct material cost is 49,680, and prime cost is 66,930. So rate per unit produced, is total overhead cost is 62,100. Total overhead cost how much? Is 62,100. So if we use the traditional method, how many units are produced? 13,800. So units produced 13,800. So overhead per unit will be how much? 62,100 divided by 13,800, 4.5. So if you use, however, if you use direct labor hour rate, if you use labor hours, how much will be the cost? Labor hours is how much? 27,000. So now if you use the labor hours, for here we use the production units to allocate the cost, then we use the labor hour. If we use the labor hour, then 62,100 divided by 27,000. Then we are using machine hour. You try to calculate for as a percentage of direct wage cost. You calculate in your copies as a percentage of direct wage cost. Don't see the solution, you try to calculate. People online should also calculate based on direct wage cost. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Please calculate based on direct wage cost, the overhead percentage to be allocated. It will come in percentage. It will come in percentage. You got the answer? How much it is? 360 percentage. So now we will look at the drawback of traditional costing system. Some drawbacks. The example X and Y we already know. With the example of X and Y, the previous example, we already know that the traditional costing system has some drawback. So here different products may utilize different type of amount of resources. Different product, here the setup cost for X and setup cost for Y were not same, right? X was required to be set up only once with low setup cost, and Y was required to be set up 10 times with more setup cost. So different products may consume different, but X may involve more labor, Y may involve less labor. So if you change the method of allocation, the cost will also change. And nowadays, with the introduction of technology, the direct cost has reduced, but say labor cost has drastically reduced. Now we don't use labors directly. Most of the things are done by machines, robots. So the labor cost has reduced, which has led to the increase in overhead cost. For some products, the overhead cost even exceeds above 50%. So allocation of overhead cost is very important. Allocation of overhead cost is very important to determine the actual what? To determine the actual cost of the product. To determine the actual cost of the product. To determine the actual cost, the overhead is very important. Allocation of correct overhead is very important. If you do not allocate overhead correctly, then you will end up pricing your product differently as compared to your competitors, and your product may not be saleable. So traditional costing system tends to overcast high volume products and undercost low volume product. Say high volume product, say X. In that example itself, if X was produced, X is produced not 10,000 but 1 lakh units. 1 lakh units of X and 10,000 units of Y were produced in the previous example, and overhead cost is how much? Overhead cost equal to 2 lakh. 2 lakh. Then, but X requires setup only once and Y requires setup 10 times. Even then, what we would be doing? 2 lakhs in traditional costing system, 2 lakhs divided by 1 lakh 10,000. How much it comes? 1.81. So the cost allocated to X would be how much? 1,81,000. 1.81 into 1 lakh. And to Y it will be how much? 2 lakh minus 1,81,000. 181. 19,000. However, Y requires setup 10 times and X requires setup only once. But how much we are allocating? We are allocating the cost more to X and less to Y. Because X is being produced 1 lakh times, 1 lakh units of X are produced and 10,000 units of Y are produced. Do you think it is more accurate? No, right? So if we use activity based costing, the results would have been different. বুঝি পাইছো না? So again, the traditional product cost model is distorts product cost for several reasons. You know, conservative principle of conservatism, financial accounting you have learned. What does this principle say in accountancy? Prudence. Right. If we have any, if we any foresee any loss or expenditure, we should book it now, but not our gains. Gains to be recognized only when there is reasonable certainty, when we receive it. Right. Conservatism. Conservatism principle requires that reported cost be based on precise and easily verifiable data. Right. Based on precise and easily verifiable data, whereas management often needs costs that are based on forecast and plans. Conservatism principle encourages expensing many costs in the current period that should be capitalized. Conservatism principle requires you to capitalize the cost, to expense of the cost which should have been capitalized. So this results in escalation of the product cost. We will go to example 2. Company A manufactures two products, product A and product B. Annual output of the two products are 10,000 units, and product B is how much? 20,000 units. So total annual overhead of the company is annual overhead is 3 lakhs. The machine hours required for product A. Product A machine hours how much? 20,000. And B is how much? 10,000 hours. Then overhead absorption using traditional costing system using machine hour rate is computed as below. So please compute. Annual output is 10,000 units and 20,000 units. Three lakh divide by 10. Kora, kitabot hai asa. You are not able to understand the question? Not able to. So I will teach you. A company is manufacturing two products. Say, duta product banai se A and B. They are manufacturing A 10,000 units, B 20,000 units. Machine hours is 20,000 hours and 10,000 hours. So for producing 10,000 units of A, see, for producing 10,000 units of A, how much hours is required? 20,000. For producing 20,000 units of B, how much hour is required? 10,000. So total hours is how much? 30,000. Total overhead is how much? 3 lakh. So overhead per hour is how much? Overhead per hour. How much? Per hour. Total overhead is how much? 3 lakhs. How many total hours? 30,000. So overhead per hour is how much? 10. Overhead per hour is 10. Overhead per hour is 10. So for A, how much? Total machine hour is 20,000. Yeah, yeah. So for this one, 20,000 machine hour is used. So 20,000 into 10 is 2 lakhs. For B, it will be how much? 10,000 into to 10, it will be how much? 1 lakh. So overhead, we got the overhead, total overhead. So now overhead per unit. Per unit you calculate. For A it will be how much? For A it will be how much? 2 lakh divided by 10,000. How much? 20. Visible, no? For B it will be how much? 1 lakh divided by 20,000, it will be how much? 5. Right? So 10,000, 20,000 units, total overhead is 3 lakhs. Machine hour use is 30,000. So we got the overhead rate per hour. Overhead per hour. How much overhead per hour? Rupees 10 per hour overhead. So per hour it is consuming 10 rupees overhead. So for 20,000 hours, how much overhead it will take? 2 lakhs. For 10,000 units, 10,000 hours, how much overhead? 1 lakh. So total is 3 lakh, right? So now for 2 lakh overhead, 2 lakh overhead is being allocated to A. How many units are there? 10,000. So overhead will be 20. How many units are there in this 20,000? So overhead will be 5. Right? ठीक है ना? If you don't remember, overhead of finance department, finance, it is allocated to the production department, and then production department to the product. Overhead of finance department allocated to production department. Overhead of finance department allocated to 3 lakhs is the overhead of what? Say finance. In my first example, 3 lakh is the overhead of finance department. First, what did we do? We allocated it to the production department. Production department are this A and B are production departments. Then we allocate it to per unit of A. ठीक है? Then production department to the product. Per unit, how much? 20 for this, 5 for this. No doubts? People online? You got my point?
Clear. Yes, sir.
So next, from the above, the following inferences can be made for traditional cost system. The finished product consume resource in proportion to the production volume, right? The proper identification of value added and non-value added activities cannot be made. We just got what? We just got an annual overhead. We don't know what costs are included here. What has made this cost 3 lakh rupees? We don't know the components. There may be various things. There may be setup cost. There may be some other overheads, product related overheads, some idle time may be there. So we don't know the breakup of this annual overhead. So activity based costing tries to analyze the breakup of these 3 lakhs. If something is there in this 3 lakh which can be directly, which is directly attributable to product A, then it will be directly transferred to product A. If something is attributable directly to product B, then it will be directly transferred to product B, and only the remaining cost will be apportioned, right? It is activity based costing. So we will go to our next topic. So first topic is covered, traditional costing. We have tried to get some traditional cost system, we have tried to get some input. So now we will try to learn the definition and meaning of ABC. Activity based costing is an effective costing system that focuses on activities, which activities are directly attributable to product A, which are directly attributable to product B. We will directly charge them. Then for the other cost also, we will try to find out what things are there, what has led to this cost. Say if there is a production setup, the production setup for A requires only 1 times, production setup for B requires 10 times. So we will allocate in that ratio. ABC is refined costing system, or a more specific way to assign cost to cost objects. The system avoids using big generic categories such as splitting a cost evenly between divisions. Instead, it allocates indirect cost to the activities that generates those costs. To activities that generates those costs. Activity based costing is dependent on what? Activity. We are stressing on activities. So which activities are leading to cost? So we'll allocate them according to that. Instead, it allocates, it will be more accurate, definitely more accurate, and it will lead to accurately calculating the cost of the product. The pricing of the product will be more accurate if you use activity based costing. Cost object consumes activity. So in ABC there are 3 things. First is cost object consumes. So cost object consumes activity. Cost object, say finance department, it will have some type of activities, right? These activities will consume resources. Finance department will perform some activities. These activities will consume what? Cost will be incurred. If they perform some activities, cost will be incurred. This consumption of resources is what drives cost. You got my point? Consumption of resources, it will consume some resources. This consumption of resources is what drives the cost. So ABC costing is 3 steps. There will be cost object which will perform some activities. These activities will consume resources. These resources is what drives the cost. While activity-based costing focuses attention on activities in allocating overhead cost to product, activity-based management focuses on managing activities to reduce the cost. Activity-based management will focus on reducing the cost. They will try to analyze the cost so that they can reduce it. Activity-based costing is that costing, the last second paragraph, is that costing in which cost begins with tracing the activities. As I already told, activity based costing will analyze what activities আমি কি কি কাম করি আছো, then we will try to analyze these activities consumes what resources. It focuses on activities performed to produce the product. This system assumes that activities are responsible for the incurrence of cost and product creates the demand for activities. Costs are charged to products based on individual products use of activity. ABC aims at identifying as many costs as possible to be subsequently accounted as direct cost of production. See what I was trying to say. ABC aims at identifying as many costs as possible to be subsequently accounted as direct cost of production. You got the point? In ABC we will identify the activities and we will directly charge the cost to the product to which the cost directly belongs. If this cost belongs to product A, we will directly charge to product A. If this cost directly belong to product B, we will charge it to B, and the balance cost only will be allocated. For instance, in conventional costing system, the cost of setup and adjustment time is considered as factory overhead and subsequently assigned to different products on the basis of direct labor hours. But in activity based costing, setup and adjustment time is determined for each product and its costs are directly charged to product, thus by emphasizing the activities. You got my point? The concept of ABC was The concept of ABC was first defined in the late 1980s by Robert Kaplan and William Burns. Initially, ABC focused on manufacturing industry where technological development and productivity improvement had reduced the proportion of direct labor and material cost. Technological advancement and productivity improvement has reduced the production cost. So what are we doing? Direct labor cost and direct material cost. So direct costs are reduced, so overheads are increased. So there is a more proportion of overhead, so we have to allocate the overhead correctly, but increase the proportion of indirect or overhead cost. ABC generally is used as a tool for understanding cost and profitability of individual product. If we prepare the cost of a product correctly, we will get what? We will get to know its correct profitability. হয় না নহয় আমি কষ্টটো যদি ভালকে নাজানো যে কিমান টকা লাগে এটা প্ৰডাক্ট বনাবলে, we cannot understand how much profit we are making by selling the product. According to CIMA, and then we will also try to reduce the cost. If we know the cost correctly, we will know what extra costs are being incurred. If we know the cost exactly, we will know what extra costs are being incurred and we will reduce this cost. We will try to reduce this cost as much as possible. We will try to eliminate the cost which is not worthy. We can reduce the extra cost and we can optimize the cost. According to CIMA, activity based costing is an approach to the costing and monitoring of activities which involves tracing resource consumption and costing final output. Resources are assigned to activities and activities to cost object based on consumption. See, the same thing. Resources are resources are assigned to activities and activities to cost object based on consumption. Resources are assigned to activities and activities to cost objects based on consumption estimates. An ABC system assigns overheads to each major activity rather than department. Instead of using the term allocation basis or overhead allocation rate, in traditional costing what we are using? Allocation basis, overhead allocation rates, but here the terms are used as cost driver. What drives the cost in ABC system? Direct labor, direct machine hours are the allocation bases that are normally used in traditional costing system. In contrast, ABC system use many different types of second stage cost drivers, including non-volume based drivers such as the number of production runs for production scheduling and the number of purchase orders for the purchasing activities, right? So we will use different methods for allocating the cost for different types of products, for different activities. Say activity 1 we will use a different method, activity 2 we will use a different method based on the nature of the activity and the cost incurred. So we are getting an traditional costing traditional costing and overhead ABC costing. How it is different? Traditional and ABC. ABC. So you got this diagram. It is in the book also. In traditional, the overhead cost allocation is to the departments. Then from the department, they select a method on which it is allocated to the product or services. So, but in ABC, what do? They identify the activities. They identify the activities, and from that activities, they here we allocate. Here we are what doing? Allocating. Here we identify the cost drivers, identify the activities, from activities to the cost drivers, and from the cost drivers to the product. Correct? And the next diagram is very important, activity based costing. So here the flow is opposite. You go to the next diagram. Activity based costing in in traditional costing, we see first the traditional costing. In traditional cost accounting, resources are allocated based on a allocation basis to the cost or the to the cost objects. But in activity based costing, first the cost objects are cost objects are ascertained, the activities are traced, and then what is actually being done, we try to find out in that activities what activities are actually performed and to which product these activities belong, and then the resources are allocated. ठीक है, the cost drivers are found. So emergence of, we will go to the next topic, emergence of activity based costing. Emergence of activity based costing. It's already time. Tomorrow we will complete this emergence of activity based costing. So tomorrow 2.3, 2.4. Okay, we will complete by 3 classes. Because one class will be required for all the practicals. After these concepts, we will do 2.6. It has practicals. We'll try to do the practicals. The theory part you can do at home. There are theory questions also are there. You do at home. See the points. When production overheads are high relative to direct cost, particularly direct labor. Production overhead costs are high relative to direct cost. ABC is very useful when what? When the when the overhead cost is very high. Say overhead cost is very high, but the direct labor, direct cost, the direct labor, direct machine cost, direct material cost is low. It is low, but the overhead cost is very high. So you have to ascertain the base very accurately so that you calculate the cost of the products accurately. So when is activity based costing is useful? When the production overheads are very high relative to direct cost, particularly direct labor. Where there is great diversity of product. When there are 1 or 2 products, you can use the traditional costing methods. But when there are variety of small products which requires various types of small activities, so the overhead cost will be more, and you have to ascertain a base to calculate the overhead cost. Where there is considerable diversity of overhead resource inputs to the product. So number 2 was diversity of the product. Point number 3 is what? Diversity of overhead types. One type of overhead is being incurred for say 5 products. These 5 products are using one type of overhead, but this overhead is not required for other 5 types of products. This requires a different overhead, different service. एकटा बनाबले eta beleg service lage, ekita banabole beleg service lage. So this overhead should not be allocated to these products, but in traditional costing all the overheads will be total. We will total all the overheads and then we will allocate to this also and this also, which will not be correct. This overhead should be allocated only to these products and this overhead should be allocated only to these products. So when this happens, then you have to use activity based costing. When consumption of overhead resources is not driven primarily by volume, consumption of overhead resources is not dependent on volume. We saw in our last example also when the cost was dependent on the production setup. So these are the reasons why ABC based activity based costing is useful and why it is required. When the product overhead are relative overhead costs are high, when there is diversity of product, when there is diversity of overhead cost types, and the consumption of resources is not driven by the volume. 2 units we have done today. You please revise this so that we can go to the next 2-3 topics tomorrow. Tomorrow we have 2 to 4 class, right? I think from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. We will try to do it till 3:30 as you wish, but we will try to complete most of the parts so that on on our next class on Monday we will do all the practicals. Okay, we'll do our practicals on Monday. Tomorrow we will try to complete our concepts, and we will try to complete our concepts tomorrow. Okay, thank you.